It happened in October 2018, right before Halloween. I was 26, working as a night manager at a 24-hour diner in Billings, Montana. Not the most glamorous job, but it paid the bills while I figured out my next steps in life. The diner was on the outskirts of town, a lonely little place right off I-90, the kind of spot truckers, night shift workers, and the occasional drifter pass through. The parking lot stretched wide and empty most nights, lit by a few flickering orange street lamps, the kind that made everything feel dimmer instead of brighter. Across the street, there was nothing but an old abandoned motel, boarded up windows, a broken sign still advertising cable TV and low rates. A relic from another time. I had been working there for 6 months, and while I had my fair share of creepy customers, drunk guys hitting on me, tweakers coming in to buy coffee with crumpled bills that smelled like smoke, nothing had ever truly scared me. That changed the night he showed up. It started with something small. Around 2 a.m., a car pulled into the lot. A beat-up green Ford Taurus, the kind that looked like it hadn't been washed in years. I didn't think much of it at first. People sat in their cars all the time, eating their food or making calls before hitting the road again. But this one just stayed. For almost an hour. I noticed it while refilling the salt shakers, my eyes flicking to the window as I moved between tables. The driver never got out. He never turned off his headlights. Just sat there, engine running. By 3 a.m., the diner was nearly empty. A couple of truckers had come and gone, a young couple stopped in for milkshakes, but otherwise, it was just me and our cook, Gus, an old guy who barely spoke unless he was complaining about the jukebox. I walked over to the register and glanced outside again. The Taurus was still there. Headlights beaming into the lot. I could barely make out the silhouette of the driver through the windshield, just a shape, motionless. I told myself it wasn't weird. Maybe the guy was waiting for someone. Maybe he was just tired, trying to pull himself together before heading back on the highway. But then I noticed something. The driver's side window was open just a crack, and from where I stood, I could see the faint glow of a cigarette ember. He was smoking, but the cigarette never seemed to burn down. It just hovered there, glowing softly, like he was holding it between his fingers but never bringing it to his lips. Just watching. I told Gus about it. He barely looked up from the grill. Probably some tweaker. If he don't come in, don't worry about it. At 3:30, the last customer left. A regular, Eddie, an older guy who drove a tow truck. He gave me his usual wave and stepped outside, pausing when he saw the car. I saw his head tilt slightly, like he was trying to get a look at the driver. Then he turned back to me through the glass and mouthed, "That guy's been here a while." I nodded. Eddie hesitated, then gave me a thumbs up, his way of saying call if you need anything, before heading to his truck. I watched as Eddie pulled out onto the road. As soon as his taillights disappeared around the bend, the Taurus headlights flicked off. That's when I knew. He had been waiting for me to be alone. I locked the front door. We weren't supposed to do that. The diner was open 24 hours, but I didn't care. Something felt wrong. The air in the place had shifted, gone thick and oppressive like the weight before a storm. I glanced at Gus. "That car's giving me the creeps." He grunted. "Call the cops if you're worried." I thought about it. But what would I even say? "Hey, there's a guy sitting in his car outside my job and I don't like it." I could already hear the dispatcher's board response. No crime had been committed. So I did the next best thing. I went to the back office and pulled up the security cameras. There were 6 in total, 2 inside, 1 over the register, and 3 outside, covering different angles of the lot. I clicked through them, my pulse quickening when I got to the one facing the Taurus. The car was empty. I froze. That wasn't possible. I had just seen him sitting there. I rewound the footage. 30 seconds ago, the driver's seat had been occupied. Now, he was gone. I bolted back to the front, my eyes scanning the lot, the street, the broken-down motel across the way. Nothing. Just the wind pushing scraps of paper across the asphalt. I unlocked my phone, my fingers trembling as I debated calling Eddie or maybe even the cops. Then something moved at the edge of my vision. I turned, hard hammering, and saw the bathroom door swinging shut. The bathroom. Inside the diner. I hadn't heard the bell over the door. Hadn't seen anyone come in. The Taurus was still outside, driver's door closed. I wasn't alone anymore. I swallowed hard, stepping back toward the counter, trying to keep my breathing steady. "Gus," I whispered. He didn't hear me. The bathroom door didn't move. No sound. No footsteps. Just a silence so deep it rang in my ears. Slowly, I reached under the counter where we kept the heavy-duty flashlight. It wasn't much, but it was something. And then, just as I took a step toward the hallway, the bathroom light flicked off. I didn't move. My breath was shallow, barely there. The hallway leading to the bathrooms was dimly lit, just a narrow strip of flickering fluorescence humming overhead. The women's restroom was on the left, men's on the right. The door that had just closed was the men's. The light inside had been on. Now it wasn't. I gripped the heavy flashlight tighter. My phone was still in my pocket, but calling 911 suddenly felt like an impossible task, like if I moved too much, I'd trigger something. I glanced at Gus, hoping he'd noticed something, but he was flipping burgers, muttering about how kids these days didn't know how to cook a real meal. I was on my own. 1,000 thoughts raced through my head. Had someone actually come in? Was this some kind of prank? Or was my mind playing tricks on me? But then I remembered the car was still outside. The driver's door had never opened. No one should be in that bathroom. I took a step forward. Then another. The scuffed black and white checkered floor stretched out in front of me, each tile feeling like a landmine. When I reached the doorway, I hesitated, listening. Nothing. No movement. No shuffling of feet. Just the low hum of the diner's appliances in the background. I raised the flashlight and pushed the door open. Darkness. The smell of cheap lemon cleaner mixed with something else, something stale, almost metallic. I fumbled for the light switch and flicked it on. The bathroom was empty. Both stalls were open, nothing behind them. The grimy mirror reflected my pale, wide-eyed face, making me look even more scared than I felt. I exhaled sharply, shaking my head. I'm losing it. But then I noticed something. The far left sink was dripping. A slow, rhythmic plip, plip, plip against the porcelain. That wasn't unusual, this place had pipes older than I was. But what was unusual was the streak. A dark, wet smear on the edge of the sink. I stepped closer, my stomach tightening. It was a handprint. The imprint of fingers streaked downward as if someone had grabbed the edge of the sink and then been dragged away. A chill crawled up my spine. I hadn't seen that before. That wasn't there yesterday. I spun on my heel and walked out fast, practically jogging back to the counter. Gus, I hissed. We need to call the cops. He snorted without looking up. You see a ghost in there? I'm serious, Gus. Someone's messing with us. He finally turned, squinting at me. What the hell are you talking about? I pointed outside. That car's been there for hours, but the driver disappeared. And now, I gestured toward the bathroom. I found a freaking handprint on the sink. His brow furrowed slightly, like he was starting to take me seriously, but before he could respond, the bell over the front door jingled. I turned so fast I nearly tripped. A man had just walked in. I knew before I even fully looked at him that it was him. The driver of the Taurus. He was tall and thin, his jeans hanging off his hips like they were a size too big. A dark green jacket zipped up to his throat despite the warm diner air. And his face, hollow, almost gaunt, eyes set too deep, shadowed by the brim of a dirty baseball cap. His skin was pale, but not in a sickly way. More like he'd been kept away from the sun for too long. He walked in slowly, purposefully. His boots barely made a sound against the tile. I tried to steady my breathing, forcing my voice to stay level. "Can I help you?" He didn't answer. Didn't even glance at me. Instead, he walked toward the booths, all of them empty, and slid into one near the back. His back to the bathroom. His face toward me. I swallowed hard. Coffee?" I asked, trying again. Silence. Gus, finally catching on that something was wrong, straightened from behind the counter. "Hey, pal, you good?" The man lifted his head slightly, eyes locking onto me. And then, for the first time, he spoke. "You forgot to check the trash can." The words were quiet. Flat. I felt a cold pulse of fear roll through me. "What?" His lips barely moved. "The bathroom trash can." For a long, painful second, nobody spoke. Even Gus, who had never looked scared of anything in his life, shifted uneasily. Then the man smiled. Not a normal smile. Too wide. Too slow. Like he was remembering how to do it. I backed up a step. "Sir, I don't know what game you're playing, but..." Bang. The sound came from inside the bathroom. A loud, sharp thud like something heavy had just hit the floor. I jumped. Gus grabbed the nearest kitchen knife. But the man? He just sat there, smiling. I grabbed the phone from under the register and dialed 911. My hands were shaking. The operator picked up, and I started talking fast. "I need an officer at the diner on I-90, near the old motel." "There's..." Then I heard the sound. A slow, wood-dragging noise. Coming from the bathroom hallway. Gus heard it too. His knuckles whitened around the knife handle. I turned my head, heart pounding, and saw something slide into view. A shape. Low to the ground. And then, a hand. Pale fingers curling around the doorway. My blood ran cold. The man in the booth exhaled a quiet laugh. And then he said, almost whispering, "Took him long enough." The first thing I saw was the hand, thin, pale, the fingers twitching slightly as they curled around the edge of the bathroom doorway. My breath hitched, my legs screaming at me to run, but I was rooted in place, my grip tightening around the phone, my pulse hammering against my ribs. The dragging sound came again, slow and wet, something heavy pulling across the checkered linoleum inch by inch. It was deliberate, methodical, and it sent an unnatural chill curling up my spine, every nerve in my body lighting up in protest, in warning. Gus moved first, stepping around the counter with his body tense, gripping a kitchen knife so tight his knuckles whitened. His voice was low but firm, the kind of voice you hear when someone is trying to suppress their own fear. "Who's there?" Silence followed, no reply, no shift in movement, just that same slow and steady dragging sound. I could feel the man in the booth watching me. My skin prickled with the weight of his stare, and when I turned my head slightly, just enough to glance at him from the corner of my eye, my stomach clenched. His expression hadn't changed. The same smile, too wide, too knowing, stretching across his face as his fingers drummed lightly against the table's surface, as if he were waiting for something. My voice barely came out, shaky and weak. Who the hell is that?" He didn't blink, didn't look away from me, didn't acknowledge the fear in my voice. "You should check the trash can." His tone was flat, emotionless, too precise, almost mechanical, like he wasn't actually speaking to me but instead reciting something memorized long ago. I backed toward the counter, my fingers slick with sweat as I lifted the phone to my ear. The 911 operator was still there, her voice sharp, cutting through the fog of terror clinging to my brain. "Ma'am, what's happening? Are you in danger?" I tried to answer, but my thoughts were coming too fast, too tangled. There was something crawling toward me, a man sitting in my booth who knew something he shouldn't, and I was seconds away from losing my mind. Before I could decide what to say, the thing in the hallway moved. The hand, thin, colorless, like wax, slid forward, pulling more of the body into view. That's when I saw it. Bare feet dragging across the floor, long and limp, moving unnaturally, as if being pulled by an unseen force. A face pressed against the tile, not looking at us, not blinking. His mouth was slightly open, lips parted like he had been caught mid-sentence, but his eyes were vacant, staring at nothing, unfocused, as if he were somewhere far, far away. A human man. A real, living man. And he was being dragged out of the bathroom by something I couldn't see. I felt my breath catch in my throat, my stomach twisting violently as the reality of what I was seeing began to take shape in my mind. Gus swore under his breath, stepping back, his grip on the knife faltering. "Jesus, hey!" His voice had an edge of panic now, the disbelief giving way to something closer to fear. The man on the floor didn't respond, didn't react, didn't even seem aware of where he was. He kept sliding forward, inch by inch, his arms limp at his sides, his body moving like a lifeless mannequin. His shirt was torn at the collar, exposing the deep, raw gash across his throat. Not deep enough to kill, just deep enough to keep him from screaming. A sharp, choking noise clawed its way out of my throat as a soft, deliberate chuckle echoed through the diner. I turned back toward the booth, my body locked in place, every muscle frozen in terror. The man sitting there exhaled sharply, almost like a sigh of relief. "Ah," he murmured, his voice disturbingly calm. "He's finally out." Gus snapped, storming toward the booth, the knife trembling in his grip, his breathing uneven. "What the hell is going on? Who is that?" The man in the booth just smiled up at him, unfazed. "You'll know soon." Then, bang. The sound exploded from the bathroom again, like something had slammed against the floor. I flinched so hard I nearly dropped the phone. The 911 operator's voice rose into an urgent pitch, snapping through the line. "Ma'am? Ma'am? Is someone attacking you?" I could barely process what was happening. My hands felt ice cold, my heartbeat hammering so fast it felt like it was trying to escape my chest. My voice came out shaky, frantic. "There's a man, he's hurt, I think, but something is." I couldn't finish. Because that's when he moved. The man on the floor, his head twitched sharply to the side, eyes locking onto mine. His mouth, slack and half open, began to stretch into a smile. But it wasn't his own. It was forced, unnatural, as if his skin had been hollowed out and something else was inside, pushing from within. Like someone had taken control of his body and was testing it out, manipulating his facial muscles like an ill-fitting mask. A slow, painful stretch of lips. Too wide. Too deliberate. I felt something in my chest snap. Gus must have seen it too, because he lurched back, the knife slipping from his fingers and clattering against the floor. My throat closed up, my body screaming at me to move, to run, to get as far away from this thing as possible. I opened my mouth to scream. And then, the lights went out. The diner plunged into total darkness. Not the kind of darkness you get when a few lights go out. This was thick, suffocating, unnatural, a void that swallowed every shape, every shadow, turning the familiar into something sinister. The hum of the overhead fluorescence was gone. The neon glow from the diner sign outside didn't seep through the windows. Even the headlights from the Taurus in the lot had vanished. It was as if the entire world had blinked out of existence. The only sound was the distant, rhythmic drip, drip, drip of the leaky sink in the men's bathroom. Then, the whispering started. I don't know how to describe it. It wasn't words, not at first. It was soft, breathy movement, like something shifting right next to me, something just out of reach, circling in the dark. My pulse slammed in my ears, my breath hitching as I pressed my back against the counter, trying to get my bearings, but I couldn't see anything, not Gus, not the man in the booth, not even my own hands in front of me. Then, somewhere to my left, Gus inhaled sharply. "Who's there?" His voice was low, rough with fear. I opened my mouth to answer, but I stopped. Because something else had breathed in response. Not Gus. Not me. Something in the diner. Something too close. I squeezed my fingers around my phone, struggling to remember if I had a flashlight app, but my hands were shaking too badly to do anything useful. The 911 operator's voice was still coming through the speaker, a faint, distant sound as if she were miles away instead of pressed right against my ear. Hello? Ma'am? Are you there? Can you hear me? I tried to respond. I'm here, I rasped, my voice barely above a whisper, but I wasn't even sure if she could hear me. My whole body was locking up, my mind racing through every possible explanation, but there wasn't one. The power was out, yes, but this wasn't normal darkness. It was heavy, pressing in on my skin like a physical thing. And then, a slow creak. A chair moving. I turned toward where the booth should have been, my stomach twisting. My brain screamed at me to run, to move, to get the hell out, but I couldn't. I was frozen, paralyzed by something I couldn't even see. Then, footsteps. Not fast, not panicked. Just slow. Deliberate. A single, measured step. Then another. Then another. Moving toward me. The whispering rose, a chorus of voices overlapping, slipping beneath each other like a tangled mess of sound. I couldn't make out words, but the feeling was there, a wrongness, a presence, something pressing against the edges of my reality. Then, cold breath on my neck. I lost it. I stumbled backward, hitting the counter hard, my hands flying up instinctively. My fingers met something solid, someone standing right in front of me. But there had been no footsteps. There hadn't been time for someone to reach me. A deep, low chuckle vibrated through the dark. Not Gus. Not the man in the booth. Something else. I felt my body lock up completely, my breath shallow, my heart slamming against my ribs. And then, just as quickly as it had started, the light snapped back on. The diner reappeared around me in an instant, fluorescent bulbs buzzing faintly overhead. The booths, the tables, the counter, Gus, everything was exactly as it had been. But the man from the booth? He was gone. No sign of him. No coffee cup on the table, no crumpled napkin, nothing. Like he'd never been there at all. And the thing in the bathroom hallway? Gone. The floor where the body had been was spotless. No drag marks. No handprints. No blood. Gus was staring at me, his face pale, his chest heaving. The knife was still on the floor where he had dropped it, and I saw him look at it like he wasn't even sure why he had been holding it in the first place. Then, slowly, he turned toward the front door. It was wide open. A single gust of cold night air pushed through the diner, rattling the napkin holders. The parking lot outside was empty, no tourists, no tire marks, no headlights in the distance. Just dark road and silence. And then, Gus did something I never thought I'd see him do. He reached over and locked the door. Gus locking the door was the final confirmation that what had just happened was real. He wasn't the kind of guy who'd scare easy. He'd worked in this diner for over a decade, seen fights break out, seen drunks pull weapons, had to throw out his fair share of weirdos, but I had never, not once, seen him this shaken. His face was drained of color, his hands trembling slightly as he fumbled the bolt into place, and that was when I realized I was shaking too. I turned back toward the booth where the man had been sitting. It was completely empty, the vinyl seat pristine, as if no one had ever been there at all. The salt and pepper shakers were untouched. The coffee cup he had in front of him? Gone. The table was too clean, too perfect. A diner that had just experienced whatever the hell that shouldn't have looked this normal. I swallowed hard and tried to steady my breathing. The 911 operator was still on the line, her voice tinny through my phone. Ma'am, can you confirm your location? Are you still in danger? I had no idea how to answer that. I licked my lips and forced myself to speak, my voice barely above a whisper. The man is gone. Who? The attacker? I don't know, I admitted, and I hated how weak it sounded. He just disappeared. There was a pause on the other end. Did he leave through the front door? Gus and I exchanged a look. We both knew the answer. The door had never opened. The lights had come back on, and he was just gone. I hesitated, my fingers tightening around the phone. I think we're okay now. It was a lie. We weren't okay. I wasn't okay. But what the hell else could I say? I couldn't tell them the truth, not in a way that would make sense. The operator didn't seem convinced. Are you sure? Do you need an officer sent to your location? I should have said yes. I should have begged for one. But a sick, creeping feeling in my gut told me that it wouldn't matter. What were the cops supposed to do? File a report on a man who never existed? Investigate an attack that left no evidence behind? I forced myself to take a breath and push down the nausea rising in my throat. No. We're fine. Another lie. I think he just left. A long pause. All right, ma'am. If anything changes, call back immediately. I hung up before I could change my mind. The moment the line went dead, the diner was too quiet. Gus still hadn't moved from the door, his hand lingering on the lock like he wasn't sure whether it was enough to keep whatever that was out. I leaned against the counter, my fingers twitching, my skin still buzzing with the lingering wrongness in the air. And then, something occurred to me. The Taurus. I had seen it. Watched it sit there for over an hour, headlights on, unmoving. I had watched that man walk inside, had spoken to him, looked him in the eyes. I turned and grabbed the tablet connected to our security cameras. If he had been here, if that car had been there, the cameras would have caught it. I unlocked the screen, my heart pounding as I pulled up the parking lot feed. The footage played in reverse, timestamped from just a few minutes ago, showing the empty lot, the empty street. I scrubbed back further. Still empty. No headlights. No car. No man. I went back even further, checking around the time I first saw the Taurus pull in. Nothing. No movement. No car. No sign that anyone had been sitting in that lot at all. The air in my lungs turned to ice. Gus, I choked out, turning the screen toward him. It's not there. The car's not there. His forehead creased as he stepped forward, squinting at the screen. What do you mean? We both saw it. I rewound the footage again, my fingers trembling. From 1:30 a.m. onward, there was nothing but an empty lot. Gus let out a sharp breath, rubbing a hand down his face. No, that's not right. You're telling me that guy just, what? Appeared out of nowhere? Sat in a booth and then vanished? I didn't answer. I didn't have to. We both knew what we had seen. Gus ran a hand over his bald head, exhaling sharply. All right. I'm done with this. I don't know what's going on, but I don't care. You call it in or you don't, but I'm not standing around waiting for whatever the hell that was to come back. I opened my mouth to argue, to tell him we couldn't just pretend this didn't happen, but before I could say anything, the phone behind the counter rang. We both jumped. The sound was too loud in the empty diner, a shrill, jarring thing that set my teeth on edge. I turned toward it, my stomach twisting. The landline almost never rang. The only calls we got on it were from suppliers or corporate, and those always came during the day, never at night. I stepped forward, hesitating before lifting the receiver to my ear. This is, my voice caught in my throat. There was breathing on the other end. Deep, slow, deliberate. I stiffened, my fingers digging into the counter. Who is this? No answer. Just that same steady inhale. Exhale. Inhale. My pulse pounded against my skull. Listen, you freak, if you think this is funny. A voice cut through the silence. Low. Flat. Unmistakable. You should check the trash can. My blood ran ice cold. I slammed the receiver down so hard the whole phone rattled against the counter. Gus's face was pale, his eyes locked onto mine. Was that? It was him, I whispered. The words barely made it out, my throat tight, my hands numb. And then, like it had been waiting for me to understand, the smell hit. Rotting. Thick and sour. Something rank coming from the back of the diner. Gus's nostrils flared, his face twisting. What the hell is that? I already knew. I turned, moving slowly toward the hallway that led to the bathrooms, my legs stiff with fear. The smell grew stronger with every step, curling in my stomach, turning it sour. I swallowed down the bile, my hands sweating as I reached the end of the hall. The bathroom was spotless. No blood. No drag marks. No handprints. But the smell was coming from the trash can. The one right beside the door. I reached out, my heart hammering against my ribs, my stomach churning as my fingers closed around the lid. And then, I lifted it. For a second, I didn't understand what I was looking at. The plastic bag inside was torn open, something wet and crumpled sticking out between the folds. Something dark. Slick. Something that looked like skin. A piece of someone. I stumbled back so fast I nearly fell, my stomach lurching violently. My vision blurred, black dots swimming in my eyes, and just before I lost my footing, I saw it. A mouth. A human mouth, pressed against the plastic, lips curled into a smile. And then, it moved. I couldn't breathe. My body locked up, my vision swam, and the world around me lurched as I stared into that trash can, my mind refusing to accept what I was seeing. It wasn't just a piece of someone, it was alive. The flesh was wet, raw, something dark oozing from the edges where it had been severed, like it had been cut loose but never given permission to die. The mouth, the human mouth, was set in pale, stretched skin, lips curled into a grotesque grin, twitching slightly as if it was trying to form words, its muscles jerking unnaturally, struggling against something unseen. My stomach twisted violently, bile rising in my throat, and I stumbled back, my heels slipping on the tile. I barely caught myself against the doorframe, gasping for air as my breath came too fast, too shallow. I wanted to scream, to run, to do anything but stand there frozen, but I couldn't because the mouth on the thing in the trash moved. It smiled wider. And then, it spoke, not out loud, but inside my head. "You took too long." The voice wasn't normal. It wasn't just a sound. It was inside me, curling through my thoughts like a snake, slithering through the cracks of my mind, 100 voices layered over one another, all speaking in a slow, cold murmur that made my teeth ache, filling every inch of my skull until I felt like my head would burst. The bag inside the trash shifted, the thing inside it twitched, bulging against the plastic like something else underneath it was trying to claw its way free. A wet slithering sound filled the air, a slick, unnatural movement, something too heavy and too alive pressing against the torn bag's edges. Then, without warning, the plastic split open. I lost it. I turned and bolted out of the hallway, nearly slamming into Gus as I sprinted toward the counter, my hands shaking so violently that I could barely focus on anything other than the overwhelming need to get away. He barely had time to react before I grabbed his arm, my voice raw and breaking apart. "We have to go. Now." Gus frowned, glancing toward the hall, his face tightening in confusion, but the moment he caught the rotting stench drifting from the trash, his expression twisted into something else entirely, revulsion first, then something much worse. "What the hell is?" He barely got the words out before a new sound cut through the diner, a sound so deeply wrong that my legs almost gave out beneath me. A wet, gurgling laugh came from the trash can. Gus stiffened beside me, his breath catching as his entire body went rigid. I watched as the realization dawned on his face, as his eyes darkened with the same creeping horror that had already overtaken me. Then, the phone behind the counter rang. A sharp, shrill ring ripped through the silence like a blade, so loud that I physically recoiled. Gus and I both jumped, my pulse spiking so hard my vision blurred. It was the landline, the phone that almost never rang. The same phone that had whispered at me minutes ago. The air thickened, pressing down on my skin, on my lungs, making it harder to breathe. Gus took a slow, unsteady step back, shaking his head as his voice dropped to something barely above a whisper. "Don't answer it. For the love of God, don't." The ringing stopped. Silence. The kind of silence that made my ears ache, the kind that felt alive, stretching out too long, like it was waiting for something. I held my breath, barely daring to move. Then, just as I thought it was over, the lights flickered. Not just once, over and over. The fluorescent bulbs above us buzzed violently, the shadows in the diner stuttering, stretching unnaturally across the floor before snapping back like something was wrong with time itself. The hum of the electricity warped, distorting like a voice speaking backward, a thick, layered sound crawling underneath it, something deep, something inhuman pulling at the edges of reality. Then, through the flickering light, I saw him. The man was back. I didn't see him walk in. I didn't hear the door open. He was just there, sitting in the exact same booth, his hands folded neatly in front of him, his smile still too wide, too slow, his eyes locked onto me, staring without blinking, without moving, as if time hadn't touched him at all. My heart stopped. I felt the blood drain from my face, my limbs going numb, every inch of me frozen in place. This wasn't real. This couldn't be real. But there he was, exactly where he had been before, as if he had never left. The phone rang again. The sound tore through me like a gunshot, a shockwave of fear so intense that I thought my legs would give out. I couldn't look away from him, couldn't move, couldn't breathe. His lips moved, not speaking, not forming words aloud, but I heard him anyway, the voice curling through my skull like a whisper made of nails. Answer it. I shook my head violently. No. No, no, no. Answer it. The whisper wrapped around my mind, pressing in, tighter and tighter, slithering into my thoughts, digging deep into the places I didn't want touched, pulling at me, twisting me. The phone kept ringing. Gus stood frozen beside me, staring at the man, his hands clenched into fists, his breathing ragged and uneven. He looked pale, sick, like he was barely keeping himself standing. I didn't know if it was fear or something worse, something leeching the strength out of him, draining him. I reached for the receiver. I didn't want to. I couldn't stop myself. The moment my fingers touched the plastic, the ringing cut off. A beat of silence, then, through the receiver, a low, guttural voice spoke two words. Turn around. A sharp breath caught in my throat as something shifted behind me. The air grew dense, charged, wrong, the kind of feeling that made my bones ache, my stomach churn, my mind rebel against the reality of what I knew was happening. I felt it, something standing too close, something pressing against the back of my neck, something cold and damp where no air should be. Then, just above a whisper, the voice came again, slow and rasping, a sound that didn't belong to anything human. You're running out of time. The moment the words left its mouth, I snapped. I ripped the receiver out of the phone, my hands shaking violently as I hurled it across the diner, the plastic casing shattering as it crashed against the floor. The second it hit the ground, the lights exploded, a burst of searing white-hot electricity crackling overhead, plunging the entire diner into total blackness. And then, the whispering began again. It came from everywhere, from the walls, from the floors, from inside my own skull, twisting and crawling under my skin, wrapping around my senses, smothering me, drowning me in a deafening chorus of voices that spoke in tones I didn't understand. Beneath it, something shifted, something heavy, something that wasn't supposed to exist dragging itself closer, the sound of movement slick and unnatural against the tile. Then, a hand clamped down on my shoulder. And the world went white. The instant that hand touched me, something inside me snapped. It wasn't just fear anymore, it was something deeper, something raw, something primal. My body reacted before my mind could catch up, every nerve screaming at me to get away, but I couldn't. My muscles locked up, my skin turned to ice, and for a split second, the world around me ceased to exist, folding into itself like reality was shifting. The whispering grew louder, not just outside of me but inside, pressing into my skull like something was twisting its way into my thoughts, dragging sharp claws over my memories, my name, my voice, like it was trying to pull me apart from the inside out. Then, the pain hit, not a sharp pain, not like being burned or stabbed, but something deeper, something wrong. It felt like my insides were being stretched, like my own reflection was trying to climb out of me, like I was being pulled towards something unseen, something waiting just beyond the edges of what my mind could comprehend. My jaw clenched, my fingers spasmed, and I could barely force out a breath as the voice wrapped tighter, pressing against the walls of my mind, whispering something I couldn't understand but somehow already knew. You were supposed to see. The words weren't spoken out loud, they didn't echo in the diner, didn't come from behind me or beside me. They existed inside me, slithering beneath my thoughts, wrapping themselves around my own mind like they had always been there, waiting for me to listen. The whispering wasn't a voice anymore. It was a presence. It was something trying to rewrite me. I didn't realize I was screaming until I felt Gus's hands grabbing me. The force of it ripped me back, my body snapping free from whatever had been pulling me in, and I hit the floor hard. The impact jolted through me, knocking the breath from my lungs, and I gasped, struggling to pull air back into my chest as my vision swam. I wasn't just in the diner anymore. Something was wrong, stretched thin, the world flickering between here and somewhere else, a place where time didn't move right, where shadows stretched in directions they weren't supposed to. And then, the lights came back on. The diner snapped back into focus around me, bright and too normal, the humming fluorescents overhead casting everything in their usual pale glow. The whispering stopped all at once, like someone had flipped a switch, cutting it off mid-sentence. The air still felt wrong, heavy and thick, something lingering in the empty spaces of the room, something that had only just stepped back, not left entirely. My breath hitched as I scrambled upright, my chest heaving, my skin damp with sweat, my entire body still trembling as Gus crouched beside me, his grip tight on my shoulders, his face inches from mine. "Jesus Christ," he rasped, his face pale, his eyes wide and bloodshot, his breath uneven, stuck somewhere between panic and disbelief. What the hell just happened? I couldn't answer, not because I didn't want to, but because I didn't know. I turned my head slowly, half expecting to see something still there, something watching, something waiting. But there was nothing, no movement, no figure, no flickering shadows. Just the diner, the quiet hum of the lights, the clatter of napkin holders I had knocked over in my panic. Everything was exactly as it had been before, but my gut told me it wasn't over. The air was still too heavy, and the smell was still there, rotting, thick, wrong, curling at the edges of the room like something festering just beneath the surface. And then, as if it had been waiting for me to notice, the landline rang again. Gus and I both turned toward it at the same time, neither of us moving, neither of us breathing. The sound cut through the silence like a warning, each ring stretching too long, rattling the air, pressing against my eardrums like it wasn't just ringing but crawling through the diner itself, like it had weight, like it had intent. Gus shook his head, his face twisted in something between fear and disbelief. "No. Nope. No, I'm done with this." His voice was uneven, sharp with frustration, but I could hear it underneath, the tremble, the hesitation, the understanding that something was very, very wrong. He stormed toward the counter, reaching for the phone, grabbing the receiver with so much force I thought he'd rip it out of the wall. "I don't know who the hell you are or what kind of sick joke this is, but..." He froze. His fingers clenched around the plastic. His breathing hitched. And then, his face drained of all color. I took a step forward, the movement feeling distant, disconnected from my body. "Gus?" He didn't respond at first. His hand was shaking, his knuckles turning white against the receiver, his eyes locked onto nothing, staring at something that wasn't there. Then, barely above a whisper, he murmured, "It's me." A sharp chill shot down my spine. "What?" He swallowed hard, his Adam's apple bobbing as he struggled to force out words, his grip so tight that the plastic casing of the phone creaked under his fingers. His lips parted, but no sound came at first, just shallow, ragged breathing, like something was being forced through his lungs against his will. Then, finally, in a voice that wasn't his own, he said, "I'm calling from the other side of the counter." A sickening wave of cold washed over me. I didn't want to turn around. Every part of me screamed, "Don't look, don't give it the satisfaction, don't acknowledge what was standing behind me," but my body wasn't listening. My head moved on its own, slow and stiff, like I wasn't in control anymore, like something wanted me to see. And there, standing behind the counter, was Gus. Another Gus. He was standing exactly how he always did, his arms resting on the counter, his head tilted slightly to the side, his expression calm. His uniform was the same, his apron was the same, everything about him looked right, except for the smile. The smile wasn't right. It was stretched too wide, pulled too tightly across his face, deliberate in a way that was wrong, as if someone had seen Gus smile once and was now trying to mimic it, testing out the movement. His eyes locked onto mine, and in a voice that was flat, emotionless, too steady to be real, he spoke 4 words. "You should check the trash can." I couldn't move. My breath locked in my throat, my mind struggling to process what I was seeing. 2 Gusses. The real one stood beside me, fingers clenched around the phone, his skin pale, his breathing ragged. But the other Gus, the one behind the counter, was watching me, his arms resting on the surface, his head tilted slightly, a wrongness in his stretched, too perfect smile. "Tell me you see it," Gus muttered, his voice barely above a whisper. I didn't answer. The thing wearing his face didn't blink, didn't breathe, didn't shift, just stared at me with something else behind his eyes, something dark, something that wasn't Gus at all. Then, he lifted one hand, pointed toward the hallway, and in a voice too soft, too empty, he said, "You should check the trash can." A cold wave rolled through me, my stomach twisting violently. My body instinctively stepped back, but the other Gus only smiled wider, pleased by my fear. The real Gus reacted, ripping the phone cord from the wall, his hands shaking. "I don't care what's happening. We need to get the hell out of here. Now." The lights flickered, but this time it was different. The glow shifted, white to yellow. Yellow to red. The diner was bathed in an eerie crimson, the metal fixtures rusted, the air thick with decay. Then, the other Gus moved. Not a normal movement, not a twitch or a step, but a shift, like something inside him was pushing outward, stretching his skin from within. His mouth opened as if to speak, but no words came, only a long, rattling inhale, like he was pulling the air into himself. Then, his voice changed. It was mine. "You're running out of time." My legs nearly gave out. The pressure in the air grew unbearable, whispering voices wrapping around me, pressing into my skin like unseen hands reaching from the dark. The real Gus grabbed my wrist, his grip like ice. "We need to go. Now." The other Gus stood up, too slow, too deliberate, his body adjusting like it had forgotten how to move. His joints popped unnaturally, his limbs bending in ways they shouldn't, his smile never faltering. Then, from behind me, near the hallway, came a voice. Not one voice. Many. "Check the trash can." I turned, dread gripping my spine, and saw movement. The trash can tipped over, and from inside, something pushed against the plastic, shifting forward. A hand slid out first, thin, pale, fingers twitching as they dug into the tile. Then, an arm, slick with something dark, the skin peeling, barely attached. Then, a head. Not a person's head. Something else. Its face wasn't singular, but many, shifting beneath its skin, mouths pressing outward, whispering without sound. It tilted, its limbs dragging forward, its flesh shuddering like it couldn't decide what it was supposed to be. The whispering rose, no longer forming words, just rattling breaths, something trying to build itself into something that should not exist. Gus shoved me toward the door, his grip bruising, his voice sharp. "Run. Now." I didn't hesitate. I bolted. Gus was at my side, our footsteps slamming against the tile. Something behind us wasn't just following, it was chasing. We hit the door, Gus yanking it open, the cold night rushing in. We sprinted onto the pavement, the diner shrinking behind us, but the second we cleared the curb, the door slammed shut. The diner went black. The neon sign flickered once, then died. And then, from the darkness inside, we heard laughter. We ran. Hard. Fast. Without looking back. The laughter from inside the diner echoed behind us, stretching through the cold night air, a sound that didn't belong in this world. Gus yanked at his truck door, hands shaking, his breath ragged. "Get in." I barely heard him over the blood pounding in my ears. I dove into the passenger seat, slammed the door, and the moment Gus turned the key, the engine wouldn't start. The street lights above flickered, dimming into deep red, casting long, unnatural shadows that bent in the wrong directions. The diner behind us shifted, the structure seeming to breathe, its neon sign completely dead. But inside, behind the darkened windows, I saw movement. Something was still watching us. Gus cursed, slamming his fist against the dashboard. The laughter from the diner grew louder, crawling into the air like it was leaking into the world itself. Then, without warning, the truck roared to life. Gus floored it. Tires screeched, and we sped down the empty road, leaving the diner and its impossible horror behind. My breath wouldn't slow, my hands still trembling. "Where are we going?" Gus didn't answer right away. His knuckles were white on the wheel, his face hollow. Finally, he muttered, "As far as we can." Neither of us spoke again. In the rearview mirror, the diner was gone. Not fading into the distance. Not blinking behind us. Just gone. Like it had never existed at all. And deep in my skull, in the place I couldn't reach, the whisper still remained. "You were supposed to see."